Good afternoon. I'll call the special session to order. We're going to adjourn directly into the executive session under Section 551.071 and 551.071.2. Consultation with attorney by telephone and/or in person concerning matters upon which the attorney has a duty and/or responsibility to report to the governmental body, including but not limited to discussion regarding settlement of a threatened litigation related to possible breach of contract for use of public right-of-way and attachment to city utility poles and/or other matters posted on the regular agenda. Could I get a motion to?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Executive session.
There's a motion to authorize the city manager and the city attorney to negotiate and finalize resolution of litigation.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We're going to go straight into the workshop session unless someone needs a break. We're good? So call to order the workshop session. First item is discussion and updates related to COVID-19 pandemic. Chief Smith.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to go back a little bit and update us. It's been a while since we've discussed total cases. I will give us active cases also, but to bring you up to speed, total cases since we began all this, state of Texas, 2,730,000. That's where we're at now with total cases in the state of Texas. Now, that's not active cases. That's just from the beginning, nearly 18 months now. County of Lampasas, we've had 2,120. Fatalities for the state of Texas, 52,471. And fatalities now for the County of Lampasas, we're at 37. We were at 33 for the longest time, and then in the last month and a half, we've gone up. Now we're at 37. Currently active cases in the state, we're at 160,000 active cases now in the state of Texas. Hospitalizations across the state, 9,462. This roughly is 5.9% of all the active cases are hospitalized. In trauma area L, which is ours, we have 223 patients. I was able to speak with Ashley this afternoon as far as what we have here at Rawlinsbrook. She said we have 3 patients right now. She did advise me, though, that they are transferring people out on a regular basis, and by a regular basis, she said almost daily. So they're not holding any critical COVID patients here. They're transferring those out. Lampasas County, we have 201 active cases. Now that is a lot, but I'll break that down for you. At the month of June, the entire month of June, we only had 19 new cases. That's in the entire month of June. In the month of July, we had 140 new cases. So far in August, we've had 101. So in 8 days, we've had 101 cases. Since the last time that we met and discussed this, we have seen 147 new cases. Vaccinations for Lampasas County. This is not the zip code. This is the entire Lampasas County, and this is for everybody that's eligible. This is age 12 and up. We are 44% with at least 1 dose. Totally vaccinated, 12 and up, is 37%. It is encouraging, though, to see that we are at 44% with the 1 dose, so we should be seeing some more of that. Population over 65, 74% with at least 1 dose, and fully vaccinated, 63%. Anybody have any discussion or comments on COVID-19 and how it relates to the city of, or the county of Lampasas?
Anybody have questions, comments?
Are there any different numbers you'd like for me to bring or research or do anything to you?
I think you're covering the ground pretty good. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Next item is discussion regarding the Lampasas County Chamber of Commerce and Visitor Center 2021-2022 agreement.
Mayor and Council, I'm going to start this off. I'm pinch hitting for Mandy, who is at back to school night tonight, and I'll just be brief and turn it over to the Chamber Director. The example of the contract that you have in your packet is the current one. In fact, the one we've used, I believe, for the last 2 or 3 annual cycles. The funding, as it's outlined in Section 2, is tied to their budget. So even though there's not a specific dollar amount, within this contract. It is tied to the budget that Ms. Unger presented at the last meeting. They are allowed by contract to come to you for individual events, as you'll see on your regular agenda this evening. The only, which can be for advertising and promotion, and up to 25% of the material, supplies, and equipment for those events. The primary services rendered is under Section 2C, and really the one that stands out and the one that you're paying for is the visitor center component, as well as some advertising, maintaining website, brochures at the hotels, et cetera. The other thing that I would point out to you is under Section 5, use of funds. It talks about how much that budget should include, or what proportion of their overall budget can be used. And we've basically determined over the last couple of years, primarily by practice and by council and chamber input, that that is 40%. So if you recall, the budget that you saw last time was at 40%. That just gives you the real rough outline or highlights of the agreement. The purpose of our conversation this evening is to see if there were any other items that you would like to include in the Visitor Center and Tourism Agreement, but I'll turn it over to Melissa.
I think Finley said most of that. The agreement has been the same the last few years that I've been here anyway. It's remained the same at that 40-60 split. And I just want to remind council, as we discussed a little bit briefly last time, that the budget that I come to council with and this agreement is strictly for the tourism portion. Right. A lot of people don't understand that we do not have a tourism director or a tourism coordinator that resides within the city. That is actually a shared position with the chamber and the visitor center. So everything that I come before you, whether it be hot funds or the agreement or my budget, is strictly for operating a tourism visitor center.
Could you give us some numbers about who comes to the chamber's office? Can you separate your clients from the visitors that are coming in? You used to give us some reports that had those numbers.
Yes, ma'am, and those will come in my reports that I do for my, it used to be quarterly, and now it's twice a year.
Right.
So all of that all those statistics and reporting has a little bit of chamber information in there, but it's strictly, we record all the calls, all the emails, all the visitors to the center, and then we also probably see, I would say, it's almost a 50-50 split between locals and visitors. And we have seen quite an increase in visitors, whether it be staycation folks, people passing through. I just sent a video over to the Parks Department this morning, and I believe yourself, and you may not have opened it because it may have looked like spam. But we get testimonials and we get calls all the time about what a great place Lampasas is to stop. And so we are trying to make our community more than just a stopping grounds for people. And actually, when they come in the center, we have all kinds of materials as far as tourism's concerned. And we also spread all that information out to all the different visitor centers within Texas. I personally drove all of our visitors guides to our chambers of commerce within the region, whether that be Llano, Hamilton, Fredericksburg. I try to do as much due diligence as possible to put Lampasas on the map. And so a lot of that is within my tourism marketing budget. But as far as the statistics and breakdowns, yes, we do record that. It's just a matter of seeing those numbers when I do report.
Okay. I know COVID has stopped a lot of stuff. Last year, I think you didn't have a Saturday, someone there on Saturday because your office was closed a lot. But is that back now that you have someone open on?
It's been back since March, yes, ma'am. And we have seen more numbers this year than, of course, we did all of last year. We were open a few months last year, I believe January through March. Just because we have quite a few events. Actually, our events are pretty spread out, so we have seen quite an increase. Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else have any questions? Any comments? No concerns?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is discussion regarding the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is primarily a follow-up to our August 2nd meeting, which I thought was very productive, hopefully for Council, but certainly it was for staff to hear your input. As I referenced, I did a PowerPoint to kind of hit the highlights of the budget memo number 1 that we have included in your packet. First of all, I just wanted to, I guess, gauge everybody's feeling. We have been operating, or at least staff has been operating, kind of on a memo update process with the budget. We don't want to give you another 50 pages of budget each time we sit down. We'd simply refer to the latest one, refer to the latest budget that you guys reviewed and amended and made comment to, and then through the budget memo back to you, we basically show those modifications, how they were incorporated. In this case, we also wanted to respond to your inquiries that evening, include the amendments, also talk about the inclusions. I think we also wanted to spend a little bit of time and talk about the timing of certain projects, particularly as it relates to those projects that can be funded out of Fund 40. The other thing that I want to make clear, and as I talked with Councilman Clark a little bit about this, about why is this in here? I didn't really feel like we did the stamp of approval on this particular item. And that is just my procedure about, I'd rather put it in and then pull it out rather than have to add it in later. So that also hopefully sends a message to council that even though I've put it on a modification spreadsheet, that doesn't mean we can't pull or modify based on that. This is simply what I took from our last conversation and tried to prepare for you as a new starting point. We also want to spend some time talking about stuff that's not included in the budget and in the discussion regarding what is looming. In other words, we've got some projects out there that we have, we know that they're a project of some sort, but they have not been defined. We have not negotiated who's paying for what, and we don't know exactly how it would all work out, and I'm speaking primarily of the pre-treatment, so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. So again, just in terms of the highlights, and this doesn't go into the detail that is included in your memo, but on the land and drainage, we think the first thing we need to do to determine construction methods is go ahead and get that drainage area engineered. At this point, we don't recommend any modification to the budget. That doesn't mean, depending on the plans that are put forth, that we wouldn't come back and say, hey, this project isn't going to be a $50,000 project. This project may be $150,000. But we don't know that until we actually walk that drainage and get some more precise plans drawn up. Water and wastewater extensions, and again, this is a very good and very valid point. Did we have enough dollars in those particular capital lines? And my comment to you through the memo was, one, is that even at that budget amount that we've included, that's less than the historical amount over the last 3 years. Plus, council now has some new tools that they can probably take advantage of. One is the transfer to Fund 22, our Economic Development Fund. So if we had a project, an economic development-based project that needed some infrastructure work, that council, through their scoring process, said, yes, there's an ROI on this, we can go ahead and do this. We could also utilize that fund. And then, of course, we'll have some recovery funds that will come to us in August of this year and August of next year that can also be used for that. So we think with some additional tools, plus in light of the fact that it's less than even the historical usage, we don't recommend any modification in those budget lines. Personnel costs, we have included those staffing changes, and we know we have not worked out all the details yet, but again, we would prefer to go ahead and put it in and pull it out as opposed to getting down to the 11th hour and saying, okay, we need to figure out how to fund $50,000 or $100,000 worth of personnel costs. Retaining walls, as we discussed with staff, no current or additional or even short-term needs are anticipated. We don't recommend any modification at this time. Trail extensions, in the context of comprehensive plan implementation, and by the way, comprehensive plan implementation is one of those looming items that's not budgeted for, but I think we've all expressed some amount of anxiety about how do we do all the stuff that's on this list. And we do it one at a time. We try to tackle the low-hanging fruit first. One bite at a time. But that's something that we felt like we would do in context of the implementation, which, as discussed on July 7th, Council decided that we'd like to put that off until after budget this fall and talk about specifically how we would tackle the implementation. Tank maintenance, again, this is a shared tank maintenance cost with Kempner Water Supply Corp. For primarily 2 tanks, at Hughley and Georgetown. They'll probably do Georgetown this year and Hughley next year. And by contract, we are responsible for assisting them in paint coating systems only. And I want to make that distinction because there are other improvements with these tanks that they're going to be undertaking, including some valving, some mixing, some things like that. And I am telling them that we are only going to pay for our contractually obligated expense of paint coating. If council has another thought on that, please let me know, but I'm following the contract on this one, unless you tell me otherwise. Fire apparatus, and just to confirm, we are funded for 21 as well as in the proposed 22 budget. So in terms of what this all works out of it, and this is kind of a very rudimentary, simplified adjustments, but we came in at August 2nd, we had about a $346,000 surplus. With those adjustments, and there's one item I do need to point out to you, the trailer that's about halfway down. That's a mistake on my part. I forgot to include that in the water wastewater budget, but there is a $35,000 trailer that's, according to our staff, pretty critical in terms of safely transporting apparatus around. But you can see we come back with about a $95,000 surplus at this point. And next steps in elephants, and the reason I call it elephants is because that's exactly what Councilman Clark and I talked about this morning is pre-treatment and plant costs. We know what we will have some costs that are attributable and for the benefit solely of the city of Lampasas in that wastewater treatment plant. However, it's certainly my opinion, and I think it should be council's, that the cost that directly benefits one party should be paid for by that party. And I think our approach is if those improvements, and we're continuing to communicate and negotiate about technology and different methods of treating that industrial effluent, but we still believe that the entire cost of that should be paid for by the beneficiary. Obviously, that'll work itself out in the next probably 12 to 18 months, hopefully. The comprehensive plan implementation, as we said, there's some anxiety about how do we tackle this big thing that we created, and that's something that we'll know more about this fall, but we have not accounted for either of those items in the budget because they're undefined and unbudgeted at this point. So we've got kind of a three-part presentation for you, and I'm going to stop at the end of each time, but on the operating budget itself, you know, what we're looking for you is any additional input and direction, what sort of modifications you'd like to see, any concerns you have. We still do not know what our tax rate is, and I read the paper every morning and I see, okay, Cove has set their tax rate, so-and-so's looking at lowering their tax rate, and we just have not gotten the information, but the the thing I would reinforce to you is currently what we're budgeted for ad valorem is less than what we expect to receive this year. It's not a whole lot less, but I still think it's safe to say we don't anticipate collecting more money than we will this year. So I think that speaks well for our tax rate. And again, our ad valorem is typically only 5 to 6% of our overall revenue budget.
So Finley, when do you expect to get those numbers?
We don't know.
So why would we not get ours why would Cove have theirs before we got ours, I wonder?
I cannot speak for the appraisal district. I know that they obviously have a relatively new chief appraiser. They
Right.
are working with a contract appraiser. So
Okay.
I can't speak for them, and I don't want to put them in a bad light either. They'll get them to us as quickly as they can. The other thing, additional scrubbing, and what I mean by that is we have gone through this budget a few times on staff. We tend to concentrate on expenses. I think you can anticipate that staff will continue to scrub this budget. I know that I've got 10,000 here and 10,000 there that probably does not need to be budgeted, so we'll continue to work as well. And then we also want to talk a little bit about utility rates, but the three parts of this presentation are the operating budget, which you've seen the modifications to, and then we'll talk about Fund 40, funded projects, and then we'll talk about utility rates after that. But Mayor and Council, I might just stop there and see what input you might have.
Any thoughts?
I'm in favor of at least defining something for the cost of living increases for our current employees. I didn't see any of that noted in what we were doing with the 346. Thoughts from council? That's actually you all. I'm in favor of the 3% to come off the top of the 346, but that's just me.
Well, I think we're not quite to the point where we'd want to come up with a number just yet. Once we get through some of the other things, there might be more money than we, sure.
Okay.
Appreciate that you say that, but yeah.
And what I might suggest is we've kind of taken different bites out of this, from departmental presentations to capital items, and I think it's probably, and tonight I'm not asking you to make a decision on utility rates, but one thing that might be, based on your comments, might be a good next step would be to clump personnel as well as utility rates into a meeting so we could have some focus on those items, but
Sure.
that would be up to council. But
Does that sound all right for everyone? Let's plan that.
Finley,
yes, sir.
do you have any idea when we can anticipate hearing something back from Derek in regards to the interceptor study?
I do not. I'll follow up with him.
Okay.
I know we're backed up. It's funny because in my next session, or in my next portion of this presentation, I'll probably reference the fact that, you used to be able to pick up the phone and call a surveyor and they'd be on the job within, usually 3 to 5 days, at least in Lampasas, and now it's 3 to 5 weeks if you're lucky. So I think everybody's getting backed up a little bit, including the professional services.
Also, I called Finley this morning and asked him a little bit of information regarding the Hostess House and its timelines. And the reason that I did that, he explained to me that if we did go ahead and move forward on that thing, we're probably looking at our engineering and architectural first, and then the structural, which would put us beyond this year's budget. Right. So when you're comparing it with other items, we keep in mind that that's going to be probably strung out over at least 2 years.
And is that coming up next? Is that your next
Yes, ma'am.
topic? Okay,
I'll proceed if there's no objection from council.
sure.
So what I would consider, again, the non-operating decisions or things that we'll look at, the Fund 40 project implementation. Those identified projects include the Hostess House, upgrade and rehab, skate park, pavilion, wayfinding signage, Hannah Spring fencing, historic colored school. Just talking a little bit about costs, we've kind of included some of those in your packet, and I think the reference point is what we talked about a year ago versus what we're talking about now. So I looked up some costs that we were talking about in August of 2020 versus today, and we thought $350,000 to $500,000 for the hostess house, $150,000 to $200,000 for a skate park, and so on. Anyway, we all know how the rest of that conversation goes. Things have gone up and scopes have expanded, and we now know that we've got to excavate 4 feet of soil and put in 4 feet of select fill. And so we know that some of those, the timing, as Councilman Clark suggested, I think is an important consideration in terms of the implementation of these projects. Hostess House, we have a scope outlined or a spreadsheet outlined in your memo, and the improved, council might recall there were 2 options for floor plan, 3 options for kitchen that were somewhat scope and estimated by our architect, and everybody kind of agreed on the option 2 for the kitchen at our July 7th meeting, and also just taking a look, if you did do what was labeled the improved function floor plan, you'd be looking at about $1.3 million for that particular. Just a reminder as well, the pavilion and skate park were design, build, procurement. So those projects moved forward maybe a little more quick pace, but everything has been backed up. Like I said, it took us 6 weeks to get geotech done, then we had to go back and stake and restake. And in terms of Fund 40, you've got a section in your memo that talks about Fund 40, and I guess the picture that I wanted to paint was that is healthy, that we continue to see fund balance building. On every September 30th of those fiscal years, we took a measure of it, and you can see where it's going. The fund balance, or 40, of course, supports chamber, events, advertising, promotion, historical preservation, and then also outdoor lighting. So, again, going back to the timing, this is the recommendation that I think makes the most sense from staff's point of view, particularly if council is wanting to try and tackle all of the projects. But I think in FY22, we would design as well as proceed with the structural improvements to the hostess house. We believe we can do the structural improvements without disrupting any bookings or without disrupting anybody, frankly. We would also suggest in FY22 we procure and pay for architectural design and construction docs for the hostess house so that we would have a shovel-ready project when we're ready to bid. And again, I think that's going to take 4 to 6 months to get, it could be done much quicker, but I think by the time we absolutely settle on the scope, make any changes to preliminary design, get a final set of design documents and construction documents, it could be down the way. And not only that, we've got to also consider a new proposal from the architect for those services.
And then in regards to the hostess house, so how soon would we be able to know exactly when that's going to happen so that we could make sure that we don't book into it? That we've got that time set aside, and because it's booked out fairly far right now, as far as I understand.
So I think the nice thing about this, knowing that it may take us 6 months to get a shovel-ready project put together, I think we can then come back in fall and bid it for a completion date on or around first quarter of 2023, which, Christmas they get a little bit busy, but first quarter or late winter, early spring, would be probably our target. And I don't believe we have any bookings. We don't have any bookings at this point for that period of time, so we wouldn't have to disrupt anyone. Am I speaking, is that right? So that, again, that was another consideration, is how do we don't want to do construction project at the hostess house during the summer because, you know, we're going to display some weddings and things like that. So I think that timing seems to make sense. We would also ask you to consider approving and proceeding with Pavilion. That project is currently, we've got a base bid with a base structure. We would need to visit with the stakeholders about some add-ons that we may want to consider with that. Council would ultimately, per the procurement design build contract, would ultimately approve the contract for construction under whatever scope was negotiated. We would ask that you go ahead and approve and proceed with skate park for FY22, approve and proceed with Hannah Spring fencing, and that you direct staff to prepare an RFP for wayfinding services as well, because that was another item that came up. In FY23, as we've been discussing, we think it makes sense in terms of timing as well to bid and award the hostess house upgrade and rehab contract to be complete in first quarter of 2023. So some other considerations, and some of these we've already talked about, but we would perhaps have the opportunity to eliminate any booking conflicts. We'd have, I think, a reasonable allowance of time to prepare architectural and construction docs for the hostess house. The other thing, too, is we should have, you know, the apparatus funding for the fire department complete or near completion. I think the chief maybe was reaching for another 100 to 200,000 for an engine last meeting, but we should be near completion in terms of what we've set aside for that. In terms of additional funding options, you know, we believe if we take care of the structural ahead of time, if we take care of all of the architectural fees in FY22, we could, depending on what's left in Fund 40, which should be on the order of $650,000 to $690,000, that we could fund that either out of reserves, or if you even wanted to include that, depending on what happens with the pre-treatment, including that in a GO issuance to help pay for that, you could consider that. Right now we're seeing, and I'm not, again, I always say that as a disclaimer, I'm not advocating debt, but it's pretty typical right now to see sub 2% money, and that I think there's some comfort level that that's going to last 6 months to 9 months, but and hopefully we can tie, if we have the opportunity to include not only pre-treatment or on the not pre-treatment, but what we're required to do on the city side, as well as any other projects, it may not be a bad time to consider that.
Finley, on the pre-treatment and wastewater plant, do we have any, would we just have to come back with a budget amendment for reserves if something came up during this fiscal year? How would we deal with that?
Yes, you would. You would come up with a budget amendment for reserves.
I'm just making sure that we're covered in case we get something that's going to disrupt the plant, or that we come close to violating permit. I don't want to do that by any means.
And hydraulically, you know that your plant is about 40% used, 37 to 40%. It's the loading is the issue. Right. And if we can control that loading, you can double your you know, in theory, and again, Jason, an engineer, needs to tell you this, but in theory, you could double your population or double your usage at that plant and still be within permit, but the loading has to be taken care of.
Yeah, I'm worried about like shock loads and those kind of things.
And just maybe to further expand on your answer, you know, our fund balances, even though we did get punched in the nose for the winter storm, you know, we still are above what we have targeted for those reserves, and would not, I think we would come to you and say, this is what we feel comfortable with in terms of use of reserves. But I think, and in fact, this was in your you had the funding and funding sources and the fund balances in your last budget rollout. I don't believe it was last Monday, but at our last council meeting, so I'd be happy to get those to you again. So let me stop at that point. And any comments on kind of what we've put together?
Everybody comfortable so far?
We just have a lot yet to discuss. And firming up, I think there's going to be multiple changes along the way.
Well, it is our hope that we can get some clear direction from council, if maybe not at this meeting, but at the next meeting on moving forward, particularly on these Fund 40 projects. And I think one of the things that's key to this as well is what scope do you want? I mean, I've kind of put out the highest ticket item kind of as again, I'd rather put it in and take it out than have to add something to it later. So certainly I think determination of the scope for the hostess house would be helpful. We have talked about a shell, building out the shell and then completing it later. I'm not a fan of that, but certainly is an option if council wants to consider something like that.
Finley, I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
So when talking about, that pre-treatment facility and whatnot, that wouldn't be coming out of Fund 40 though, would it? I mean, that's separate than all these other projects we're talking.
Absolutely. It's not eligible for funding.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Finley, if everything gets approved to go and you need to be speaking to someone about CO, how quickly does that take effect? How quickly can you get someone to give you those numbers?
We have done some preliminary discussions with Jennifer Ritter, our financial advisor. I don't know what the timeline, if we told her to go, I don't know exactly what the time frame would be. It's typically 60 days, it would be my guess. Yvonne?
So would it be possible to get some idea of the debt we have at the moment, a dollar amount?
Yes. In fact, we have that. We can make sure we get it to you.
Okay.
I think it's on the order of 12 million, 13 million? Yeah. But we'll give you that's also in the back of your audit, but we'll be happy to get that to you and actually give you what Jennifer sent us as well.
So maybe next Monday, if we plan for that to be a
Absolutely.
budget talk, we could do that.
I would also ask that in our next workshop on the 22 budget, the actual operating budget funds that we have in here, that we look at all those additional personnel costs and so on and so forth. I think
Including,
we've had some discussion. I talked with the mayor a little bit about some of the stuff last week, and I'm concerned, maybe I'm confused or something in regards to who we have on staff as far as maintenance and what those duties are. And I want to make sure I'm very clear on that before I, how many are dedicated to maintenance?
Sure.
And I know they work, I think, under the park system, group, but I want to make sure that before we start adding something, that the definition of those two particular individuals are directed in a way that the maintenance is taken care of.
You bet. And I'm assuming that we also want to begin to look at COLA increase, correct?
Yes.
Same time?
Correct.
Okay. And again, those positions that I put in, those positions which, what did I say, $180,000, they're likely going to be less than that. That was a very high estimate in terms of their grade level, as well as I didn't take the minimum, I took the midpoint, and so there's some fluff in that number as well that we can fine tune.
Well, Mr. Clark and I discussed, excuse me, Mr. Clark and I discussed that the council actually came up with those requirements. The staff hadn't brought to us that they needed these 3 additional people. So I guess it really should be a matter of how badly they are needed as to whether we want to implement that or not.
Yeah, I was mainly concerned with the maintenance.
Maintenance, right?
Staff. The electric worker and the IT, I don't have a real big problem with, because I see some needs there due to lack of personnel and load of the work. But also on the tank maintenance,
Yes,
I would suggest that we stay strictly with the contract.
absolutely. The building maintenance, the two individuals that are currently there report to the assistant city manager. So we'll get you some more detail on that. Any other comments on Fund 40? And then just finally, again, I wanted to bring this up because there is some less than clear sailing ahead, perhaps even in the electric market, particularly around the ancillary services or ancillary charges. And I think I mentioned that a little bit in my comments to you after the Texas Public Power Association meeting. You know, how they procure ancillary charges has now been hedged on the side of reliability versus efficiency, which means the market pays for that extra reliability, which isn't a bad thing, but it's unclear in terms of how that will shape out. I think ERCOT has also suggested that they will be looking at an upgrade just in general admin, not this year, and maybe not next year, but the following year. They're looking for a pretty big jump. So there's some changes going on in the electric market that council can certainly wait, but you also heard directly from Flint, you know, he can't buy copper wire today what he could buy it for even a year ago. So materials continue to go up. We also want to make sure that we take a thoughtful approach in terms of our utility rates as it relates to capital needs, plant upgrades, tank maintenance. You know, we've got a source to do the coatings of our tank for this year, but next year we're going to be faced with perhaps another $200,000 because if they go from Georgetown to the Hughley tank, that'll cost some extra money for next year. And then the other item that, you know, we used to do a lot when I was with the Y is that we would take a little bite every year, and perhaps that has some consideration for council, you know, rather than waiting until you have to make a major capital improvement and say, okay, everybody's going up 20%. You know, if you can go up 2 or 3% a year, maybe that makes some sense for council.
One other thing that's not on this list at all is that the dams.
Correct.
Do you anticipate that board coming back? We normally give them how much a year? 15,000?
15. Yes.
And they indicated last year they may come at us for 100 and something thousand.
Correct. And we had talked about, you know, doing
Have we budgeted anything?
We've budgeted the 15. The legislature did not supply the state with its money this biennium, so we don't see anything pressing at this time. But I think it is something to keep in mind. If we can pay, maybe we double that amount for 3 years, and then we're almost there in terms of that 1.75% match. And,
Okay.
and we can up that if you'd like to include that as a modification.
I don't know. I'm wondering if the new council members are familiar. Of course, they weren't here at any of those meetings, so.
I think we should see whatever else is in there as well, just so that we can go over it. I don't think you brought it to us yet, Finley, for all of the other contributions we make to all the other entities. Might be helpful just to know what we're paying for everybody.
Does the new council members need any explanation on that in regards to those dams?
At some point, Randy.
And we can have Paul Welborn come and he can explain everything to you. But you know, the city has had a history probably before 1957 of flooding about once every 10 to 15 years, major flooding, downtown completely underwater. Since those dams were constructed, we had a flood in 2007, but it didn't ever get into any of the downtown buildings. So the WCID, or Water Conservation Improvement District, Lampasas County, and those dams we've kind of gotten into a state of complacency because we've never had an issue with flooding downtown, at least, since those have been put in place. Now that there's additional development downstream of those dams, there is a greater hazard, and therefore some of them are now rated as a high hazard, which means they need to be upgraded. But those dams serve us well.
And I've forgotten, do those developers pay into this fund as well? The ones that are building all the homes that are affected by this?
They don't pay into that fund. They do, in a certain regard, in terms of taxpayer money being used for that public safety infrastructure. But no, the way that they mitigate that is by containing that water on site.
What about the county? Are they paying into that as well?
The county is actually looking at new subdivision regulations
Right.
that address that, which is very similar. You cannot discharge at any greater velocity than what you were before it was developed. So.
Right. My question was, is the county paying into the?
Oh, the WCID?
Yes.
Yes, they have, but I don't know. I don't want to speak for the county, but they typically have not paid as much as we have paid into it, but I don't know the exact amounts.
I think it would be good to have Paul come to maybe one of the new workshops, because he's very good about explaining it, and, I mean, I've learned so much
I
from
just
him.
didn't want them showing up at a meeting and asking for $150,000
Right.
that we hadn't.
And we've
Anticipated.
we've tried to keep council somewhat up to date on that process and where they were going with that WCID and the high hazard funding, but we'll bring Paul back for you.
Thank you.
So the comment on utility rates is not do you want to go up on rates or not, but do you want to continue to talk about it? Because if council is interested in looking at this more closely, we'd be happy to do that. But if there's a sense or a consensus from council that you do not want to consider utility rate increases, then that would be good to know too. We won't prepare as much.
Were you planning to bring this back next Monday?
Unless council felt like they did not want to talk about utility rates.
You've got the chart in the back that shows what a 0.2% would do for the households, or
I think we need to at least look at it. I don't know that we'll move in that direction from my standpoint, but I think we have the need to at least, consider it.
Fair enough.
do that Monday?
Does council have any other questions of staff? Anything else I can provide for you? Anything else you'd like to talk about at our next budget meeting, which we may want to discuss at this time?
Personnel salaries, electric rates, and hopefully we'll have a new tax rate by then. Anything else anybody wants to put down?
No. And Mayor, I don't know, there may be some folks that are interested in speaking on the subject of the Fund 40 projects, but I defer to you and council on that. But if you have anything else, any other information you need, please let me know.
Thank you. Does anyone need to hear anything else? Does anyone want to speak? Do we have a list of someone? Then we'll continue on, if that's all right. We need a discussion regarding any item on the regular agenda. Nothing. Adjourn the workshop session. Does anyone need to take a break? We want to take a 10-minute break here. 5-minute break. Monica, whenever you're ready. We'll call to order this regular session, and Chief Bailey, would you please lead us in prayer?
Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, Chief Smith's COVID report reminded me that many people are suffering and grieving for friends and loved ones that have passed. Father, we ask that you embrace them with the comfort and knowledge and knowing that they live forever with you. Father, we thank you for the blessing of new days. Every day is a chance for us to do better. Father, we ask that with the days that you give us strength to face the day, more knowledge and more wisdom, and always give us hope and joy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag, pledge allegiance to Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
I don't believe we have any presentations and proclamations, so we will go into the public hearing citizen comments. 1.1, citizen comments. Any citizen who desires to address the City Council on a matter not included on the agenda may do so at this time. The City Council may not deliberate on items presented under this agenda item. And we have no one. 1.2, citizen comments. Any citizen who desires to address the City Council on a matter that is included on the agenda may do so at this time. No one. 1.3, public hearing to receive citizen comments regarding a request for a specific use permit for property described as Lot 7-8, part of Lot 6, Block 66 of the Lampasas Springs Company First Edition, commonly known as 607 West 1st Street, Lampasas, Texas, Lampasas County, to allow for an accessory dwelling in an area zoned single-family residential 10 SF10.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Ms. Carol Smith has submitted her application for a specific use permit to use it for an accessory dwelling. Her intent is to build a 640 square foot cottage, if you will, that she will actually reside in. I did put this before my Planning and Zoning Commission. They did recommend approval. I did send out notices to 16 property owners within the 200-foot radius. I received one back in favor, none in protest. All the area around this property is zoned single family SF10 as well. I did put the accessory dwelling information in your packet as well, so you would know the definition of what the accessory dwelling means, that it is zoned with a specific use permit, and I also related it back to our comprehensive plan. So that is a section that I kind of highlighted in green in your packet for you to review. And it stipulates in here that they are looking for life cycle housing is kind of where the recommendations for the future of their plan for single family. And that would to provide options to expand housing types where mother-in-law or accessory units can house a family member or a tenant. Currently today, as Mr. McCauley had brought to my attention, that in our current zoning regs, it is not used for any type of commercial or, rental, property, which Ms. Smith is aware of that. Going forward, if the recommendation or something we wanted to and change the wording or modify it, then that is something that was recommended through Half and Associates. But as of today, it is something that would not be used commercially or for rent purposes. It's strictly for her family.
Right. Anyone from the public have any comments? Council have any comments, questions, concerns?
I have only one.
Yes, sir.
It'll meets the setback requirements where it's proposed to be located.
Absolutely. With this accessory dwelling, it only has to have a 10-foot separation from any other structure, 3 feet off the property line. She right now has 2.5 lots. So the placement on the survey that I provided to you is to the rear of her property. It's not identified specifically on that survey. However, that'll be something when we go through the building process, we'll make sure that it adheres to all that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? No. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Next item, 2.0 minutes, discussion and possible action concerning approval of the minutes of the regular meeting on July 26, 2021.
I didn't see any corrections. Recommend approval.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda 3.0, 3.1, discussion and possible action regarding purchases and charges in excess of $4,000 from July 1 to July 31, 2021. 3.2, discussion and possible action regarding the June 2021 investment report. Would anyone want to pull either of those items? Can I get a motion to approve?
Recommend approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We do not have any board department reports. Next on to routine matters, city manager's operational report.
Just a couple of very brief items, Mayor and Council. As we discussed during the budget conversation, staff did attend the TPPA conference. I think we hit on just about everything that I talked about. I think both PUC and ERCOT have their work cut out for them. ERCOT has identified a 60-point roadmap to improve reliability. And again, that reliability will likely come at some cost to the market, but we will keep you informed on that. I-14, you've probably seen some press about some renewed momentum on that project. And I think there's always been momentum, but it seems to be getting stronger. I think a couple of things, particularly in Central Texas with increased traffic, with some perhaps even new interest on 281 from the state. Maybe there's some synergy between both those projects. And just to let you know, kind of coincidentally, I did get a chance to talk with the Brownwood District engineer, and Elias is anxious to come down and brief and talk to us about that, even if it's just a small group. However, TxDOT has gone back to lockdown. They're not doing any non-critical in-person meetings, but we hope to see him in the future. Swimming pools are basically closed for the season with the exception of Hancock. We will be able to at least keep that open through September on the weekends. And I want to thank Zach Morris, Herb Pierce, along with Mayor Monroe for attending the newly elected conference by TML, and also remind all council folks that if you have something that you see you'd like to attend or training opportunity, please let Becky Sims know, and she will help with arrangements and get you signed up, and we'd certainly encourage that. That's all I have. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. No mayor comments. We have no unfinished business. New business, 7.1. Discuss and consider the election of the winner of the website photo entry contest.
Mayor and City Council, there were 6 photo entries for the month of July.
Anyone have a favorite? They're actually all very good, aren't they?
Say number 2.
Have a motion for number 2. Second.
I'll second that.
Motion is for number 2. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seven point 2, discussion and possible action regarding hot fund request for the Lampasas County Chamber of Commerce and Visitor Center. Sponsored Lampasas Beer Barn LTX Barbecue Fest in the amount of $2,260.24 to be held September 10th through the 11th, 2021.
Yes, Council. So if you notice on the Hot Funds request for this year, it is significantly higher just by a couple $100 due to the fact that the event last year was only a one-day event. It is going back to a two-day event, which it was originally intended to be a two-day event. So that is the difference. And we are also expanding our advertising area. So we are going to areas where there are barbecue cookers and attendees that reside in those cities and counties. And those are larger areas. And so the advertising expenses for those areas is significantly higher in those zip codes.
Could I get a motion?
Recommend approval.
Second.
Second. Anyone have any comments or questions or concerns?
How many teams are you expecting?
So last year we had 34, and that was kind of a last-minute influx. We had quite a few that came in the last couple of weeks prior to. We're shooting for double that this year, about 60, but we're kind of behind the mark in advertising for it. So we anticipate quite a few that will come in, towards the end as they decide.
How does that pay out too?
So we actually increased the payout this year to $7,500 versus $5,000 that we did last year, and so that's really enticing for a lot of teams. And so we're actually spreading all of our advertising out, which we've done over the past couple of years, to like Waco, Temple, Belton. We're gonna hit Llano, Georgetown, and so we've got a lot of interest. We created a Facebook page for it, and which we're doing for all of our events actually now. So yeah, we're excited. Yeah, we're gonna do a tailgate party on Friday night. So
I have one question regarding the ball fields. Finley, are we going to close those off, protect those in any way, keep anybody from getting on them? I understand the lights are going to be on for that.
That's,
what was the question? I apologize.
For the ball fields?
Yes.
Yes, I believe so, and
This is not that same cook-off, Randy. I apologize.
That's the October event
That's the
that's
Go
coming.
Texan cook-off in October at 580. We're actually going to the youth livestock.
Yeah, no, the lights aren't on for this one then, on the barbecue?
It's a private facility. It's a county facility.
But to answer your question for the 580, yes.
Okay.
But that's a different event.
Melissa, is
580, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
this an event that is judged so that these entries get point system for
Yes, ma'am.
for statewide stuff?
It actually has a state championship designation that I worked with the state of Texas to receive, and then it is also sanctioned by a barbecue cook-off association.
So that should bring a lot more teams in as well, I would think.
Yeah, and they have a lot of great advertising mediums, and there's a lot of word of mouth, and so, but yes, chasing the points and chasing the money, which Zach alluded to, is very, very popular. Good. For tourists.
Any other questions? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7.3, discussion and possible action regarding hot fund request for the 10th annual Lampasas County Wine Tour event on September 25th in the amount of $1,288.56. 10 years, wow.
Yes, so we unfortunately we had to cancel the event last year due to COVID, and everybody is calling off the hook to try to make sure that we are doing it again this year. And so we had our first meeting, and we again will be requesting the same amount that was approved last year, even though we did not do it. And we are actually surveying attendees. We have been doing that for the past few years that we've had the event. And so when we surveyed those attendees, we found that there is a large percentage from outside of the 76550 zip code, which really reinforces the point that a lot of people bring their friends, they bring their families from out of town to actually come to this event. So. And we'll be highlighting all of our Lampasas County wineries for this event specifically.
Could I get a motion?
I recommend approval.
Second?
Are there any questions, concerns we need to ask? How many buses have you gotten so far?
2 with the third one on hold.
On hold?
Yes, ma'am.
Sounds great. All those in favor?
aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
7.4, discussion regarding a resolution authorizing the creation of the Central Texas Regional 911 Emergency Communications District.
Mayor and Council, my name is Jim Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Texas Council of Governments. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to discuss an item that will be of vital importance to the safety of your citizens. And I want to start off by assuring you that I'm not going to go slide by slide and point by point. I'm going to cut to the punchline. I'm going to give you 911 101 and then tell you what we're trying to do. Currently, your citizens pay 50 cents on every device that they carry or that they communicate over, whether that be a landline phone, a home phone, a pager, a fax machine line, a computer modem line, whatever they may have that has to do with telecommunications. They pay that to their telecommunications provider. In my case, it's AT&T, but it could be whoever else that might be. That provider sends that money to the state comptroller's office, where the money goes into a bank account known as Fund 5050, which is the 911 Trust Fund. From there, the State Emergency Communications Commission meets with the legislature every 2 years, and the legislature in Austin decides how much of the 50 cents that your residents sent they should get back for us to operate the 911 system. Some years that's 30 cents if the legislature decides they need the money more than we do, and some days that's 50 cents, just depends upon what the political climate is. What this resolution before you intends to do is to take that entire process and only change one part of it. And that is when the money goes to the state comptroller's office, instead of it being moved over and pouring into Fund 5050, the arm will move this way and it'll drop that money right back into the region at the Central Texas Council of Governments, thus ensuring that we get every penny that your citizens pay. It would no longer be subject to the appropriations process, would no longer be an unpredictable funding stream. So that is all this resolution is asking to do. That Emergency Communications District will have no taxing authority, will not have the authority to borrow money, will not have the authority to raise the fee beyond the 50 cents that is statutorily set right now. So the impact to your public safety officials and to your residents should be virtually zero negative, only upside of having a more stable funding stream through the Council of Governments. Why now? We've had this authority by statute for about 6 to 8 years. And we have, and if you do look in your packet, there is a chart that looks like this, historical funding trends. Right now, the Council of Governments, our region generates about $6 million every biennium in 911 service fee. So if you look at that chart, you can see that for the last several years, 7.2 million, 7 million, 8.7 million, we were receiving more from the state than we could have generated on our own. And so I did not recommend to our board of directors that we pursue that designation because we would have been leaving substantial amounts of money on the table. But if you look at those last two numbers, 6.4 million and 6 million, that is getting very close to the number that we generate. And every July, I make this presentation to my board and we make the decision, should we stay in the state system or should we go it alone? This year it was going to be rather tight, until 2 weeks ago when I received a phone call to be on a conference call with the state 911 emergency communications director, who informed us that the state staff made a small accounting error and the 911 trust fund is short $26.9 million.
Oh.
So the line that you see below you, which says 5.5 million or 4.8 million, will be our revised allocation if we stay in the state system. The state taketh and the state taketh. They decided that their error means that we cannot replace any 911 equipment for the next 4 years. We cannot upgrade the system for the next 4 years. That's how they're going to balance the shortfall. And so I went to my board and recommended that under the Health and Human Services Safety Code and under the provisions of the Local Government Code that we be empowered to move forward to ask our members, you being one of those, if we could get resolutions of support to become a 911 district so that we don't have these types of accounting errors that would impact our system. We're allowed to do this under statute. It requires no vote. All I need to do is to gather 39 resolutions. I've been in Lampasas twice today, once at Commissioner's Court this morning. My staff is in Belton, Harker Heights, and Kempner tomorrow. And my other staff member today is in Rockdale, and we will be in Cameron. And we've already received 15 out of the required 39 resolutions. Be glad to answer any questions on what can be very complex, but it also can be very simple. Very minimal impact to your residents, no financial impact to your residents, but control over the system and local control over how those funds are spent.
Could I get a motion to approve that resolution before we have any discussion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any comments,
Yeah.
questions?
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And it has to do with exactly how this works, because I've had a lot of citizens' complaints that it's faster to drive yourself to the hospital than to get the ambulance out with 911. And I know that has nothing necessarily to do with the 911 system. It has to do with the ambulance that's here in town. But what is your relationship with like Acadia or their dispatching issues, or how would that be resolved?
Okay, let's talk about how the system works and what we pay for and what we don't pay for.
Okay,
That probably
thanks.
would be instructional. We are allowed by state statute to pay for everything from the moment that the resident hits 911. That goes down as a dedicated set of trunk lines, separate from any other phone lines. So it's a dedicated system. We pay for that. It pays for the data that accompanies that, so the address, the name, the phone number. And then it comes up in your dispatch center, and there's a box that sits on it that deciphers all that information. We pay for that box. Everything else you pay for, which means that from the moment the call is delivered to your first responders, your dispatchers, what ambulance gets dispatched, how well they perform, your first responders, what volunteer fire departments or paid fire departments, that's all local, and I have no interaction with that. We
So-
can advise, but we do not have any ability to impact that.
So in a nutshell, when we don't have very good service because let's say I have maybe T-Mobile and the service is terrible, I can still call 911 because of your dedicated line.
Dedicated line.
So basically, you're the backbone.
We have an analog backbone that has just been upgraded to a digital backbone, which is separate from any of your digital lines. So I know that there have been a history of cuts on data lines in this part of the region over the many years. These are a dedicated pair that are totally separate from any of that communication.
Thank you for the clarification.
You said that there wouldn't, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Said that there would be no financial impact to our citizens, but there'd be minimal impact. What do you mean by that?
It's been a long day. I probably misspoke.
Okay.
There will be no financial impact. There will be no negative impact. There will only be positive impact is what I'm trying to say.
Perfect.
Positive impact in that 8 years ago when the state of Texas was having a financial crisis, they slashed all budgets 10%. We won't participate in those cuts anymore because we will have our own funding stream that's dedicated to come here. So what I really meant was there's no downside, there's only upside.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else?
Yes. Can Texas take this back from you guys, and do they have a procedure to do that?
They cannot. To give you just a little bit of history on that, you never know how far to peel that onion when you start one of these presentations, so thank you for these questions. Back when 911 was enabled in Texas in 1987, communities had to make a decision. Do you want to be your own district, or do you want to be part of the regional system? If you were part of the regional system, you went to the state 911 commission. If you were your own district, you got the money directly. Some cities decided that maybe they had made the wrong decision being in the state system. So a series of pieces of legislation were passed that were targeted for individual communities to get out. And about 6 to 8 years ago, we approached then Representative Aycock, who was your state rep, and we proposed to him that perhaps a blanket piece of legislation that would allow any 911 regional system to exit the state system was a good idea. And so it only flows one way. The state cannot compel us to be in their system. It is at our discretion, with consensus of our members through these resolutions, that we can extract ourselves from the state system. Once we are extracted, we are a political subdivision of the state of Texas, and the state cannot touch us.
Gotcha.
Anything else? We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your support of the Council of Governments.
Thank you, sir.
You'll have a great meeting.
7.5, discussion and possible action regarding the first reading of an ordinance for a specific use permit for property described as Lot 7-8, part of Lot 6, Block 66 of the Lampasas Springs Company, First Edition, commonly known as 607 West First Street, Lampasas, Texas, Lampasas County, to allow for an accessory dwelling in an area zoned single-family residential 10, SF10.
Mayor and Council, this item was discussed during public hearing, and at this time, I'm asking for you to consider a motion to approve, deny, or approve with modifications a specific use permit for an accessory dwelling.
Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Oh, you're still there? So we've got discussion and possible action regarding the approval of the Hidden Oaks final plat.
Mayor and Council, I went ahead and added a staff report, which is kind of outside the norm, but we've been working on this for a while, so I want to kind of give you a timeline of everything that's happened with our final plat approval. We did do the civil plan review, was completed back in January of 2021. We did do the text out approval for the entry and the road access, which was done in April of 2021. The final infrastructure costs have been submitted by the developer. The curb and gutter to be installed. There is going to be a dedicated public utility easement for the lift station. And then we have the water and sewer and electric, of course, will be provided by the city of Lampasas. The development agreement terms have been agreed upon, however, has not been executed as of this date, but that will happen in the very near future. The plat will be filed upon acceptance of the infrastructure once it's been completed and accepted by the city. And then the developer has requested that we'll do the voluntary annexation, so that'll be the step process we'll take, just like we do with Hillside Acres, same process. This was heard before my Planning and Zoning Commission on August the 5th, and they did recommend approval.
Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any conversation, any questions, concerns? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, Becky.
Thank you very much.
7.7, discussion and possible action regarding approval of Xerox lease contract and system upgrade for the city library. Hi.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Basically, our lease is up, and we've got a comparable machine to what we have right now, so the cost is going to be pretty much the same as well, about $300 a month, and that's with the copies and prints. So.
Could I get a motion, please?
Motion.
Second? Zach, is second. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Shanda. 7.9, discussion and possible action regarding the approval of the investment and strategy policy resolution. Sorry. I've got a blank eye here. Discuss and consider street closure for Live Oak to Pecan on 3rd Street for 9/11 Remembrance Event on the square from 8 to 11. Chief Bailey?
Mayor, Council, on September the 11th, the mayors of Lampasas County are having a memorial event for remembrance event ceremony for 9/11 for the 20th anniversary. We're requesting permission to close the streets from 6 a.m. until the event ends at approximately 11:12-ish for the safety of our pedestrians and those that attend the event. Street will be closed. East 3rd Street will be closed from Live Oak to Pecan Street during that time if you approve it. So we're seeking a motion for your approval to close the roadway.
Recommend approval.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Now, 7.9, discussion and possible action regarding approval of the investment and strategy policy resolution.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is an annual resolution that we do on the investment policies, that we review that on an annual basis. There has been no changes to it since we had renewed it last August.
Could I get a
Recommend
motion?
approval.
Chuck recommends. Second?
Second.
Randy? Any questions, concerns? issues? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.